Tēnā rā tātou katoa, nā mahara mai, piki mahara mai. Ki te wānanga o tēnei ahi, o tēnei rā. Um, uh, e tuwhera te whenua, te wānanga. So kia ora koutou. Welcome. So no mahara mai, that means welcome. Yeah, my name's Mark Harvey. I'll introduce myself a bit better in Te Reo Māori in a second. We are here for this workshop, wānanga, called Tuwhera Te Whenua. And I'll outline that in a second. So some of you know me, but some of you don't. I'll just give a little pepeha, which is basically a kind of identification of where I'm from, from our Māori and Pākehā / New Zealand European background. And I'll introduce this and then I'll hand it around to everyone else in a moment. So yes, thank you again for turning up today. It's 4 p.m. on a Friday here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I don't know what time it is where you are. So I hope you're okay wherever you are. It's not too late. So ko tararua me taranaki te maunga, ko ataki te awa, ko Aotea me tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Tū te hapu, ko Ngaruhine me ngate raukawa ki te tonga, te iwi. Kia ora koutou. So yeah, ko Mark Harvey taka whenua. So I'm Mark and I teach at the University of Auckland. Usually I'm hiding from there at the moment out in the forest, which actually looks like this 3 meters from our studio out in West Auckland in Te Karawamaki iwi territory. That's the tribe that lives here. And yeah, so we're here for this workshop. It's called as I mentioned, Tuwhera Te Whenua. It's going to be a workshop, well, the plan is to have a workshop here where we each can consider engaging with decolonising economic futures from each of our own respective cultural standpoints. I'm inviting you to have a go today to brainstorm collectively, collaborate, if you like, in generating decolonising frameworks in some way, whatever that might mean. So this workshop's influenced by recent Māori perspectives around decolonising, Indigenous-settler treaty frameworks, particularly in our country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Tiriti of Waitangi, as I know it. Māori economic models are also of interest, influence for me. Notions of transdisciplinarity, I come through that, what that means. UN defines that, but there's better definitions. Basically, where lots of people from lots of disciplines and things come together and make stuff together, something new to try and address some big world issues. At least that's the goal. So I work a lot on that. Yeah, collaborating, I work in consensus-based decision-making a bit, so we may engage with that. I normally work in person, kanohi ki te kanohi, face-to-face. So working on Zoom is quite a challenge. It takes me back to COVID, actually, the last time I did this with students and with research collaborators. So yeah, so we aim to depart from the usual colonial capitalist models of economics, including endless growth and extractive perspectives. And you know, I come here also not only as an artist, but also as a social science researcher. And I also have a strong interest in Mātauranga Māori territory. A range of things I influence what I look at, including policy, policy design, conceptual frameworks, philosophy in various directions, various cultures, even some economics way back in you know, beneath my grey hair. As Matthew knows, I said it this morning, and Jenny probably knows, I first did a Marxist course on New Zealand society when I first started my university degree. So that's a bit about me. So what we'll do is we'll in terms of a framework, we'll do what we call whakawhanaungatanga, which is basically about building relationships in order to understand where we're each coming from, and that can help. So you'll get to share where you come from and who you are and stuff in a moment, and what you're into. And because that could offer stuff that you could bring to the table. We'll look at what a Te Tiriti model might be, or a treaty model might be from your perspectives, and how could that be useful? How could it also not be useful? Could be a thing, but in where I'm from, it's particularly useful. Well, ideally, we were going to do breakout rooms where people would brainstorm together in smaller groups. We'll see how we go with that. And then, and we'll basically be generating ideas through it. So I hope that helps. And if you can't understand me, just say. If you have any questions, just speak up. I've got a cold flu. It seems a bit better than it was in our panel this morning. So hopefully everything's okay there. Is there any questions? Any comments? Jokes? I was always told to wait 40 seconds, but maybe I won't do that to you. Cool. So thanks again to the CERN folks and Liviana and Jenny also for helping to host me here. Okay, so we could go around the room, and if you feel comfortable to introduce yourself, what you identify with, where you come from, and some of your interests, that would be great. How long have we got, Jenny, by the way? We got 2 hours?
I don't. Let me just look at the program and I'll tell you
Yeah.
what we're scheduled for.
Oh, 2 hours. It says 2 hours, but we'll go for as long as we want to.
Yeah.
We won't go past 2 hours. Yeah. Sorry, Jenny. Thanks. I found it. I looked up the flyer. Awesome. Okay, so I don't know who would like to go first. Maybe Saideepa, is that how I say your name?
Yes. Thank you all. I'm Saideepa or Deepa, and it's beautiful to be here because I think my path to this conference, a few people, some of you have played a part in me being here today. I met Simon Barber at a conference last year in Hobart. I live in Lutruwita, Tasmania, and I asked because he talked about Maori economic thinking, and I said, "Oh, this is what I've been looking for, different economic models, different economic ways of thinking. Can you tell me or give me more resources?" And he pointed me to your work, Matt. And he said, "Look up Matthew Scobie." And that's all he said. And so I looked you up, and then you referred to diverse economies. So then I found Jenny and others' book, and I bought the book, read it, and then I came upon Community Economies and looked it up and found Grace Walsh, who lives in the same place as me. And so I met Grace, and it's just beautiful. And then she told me about Liviana, and so I'm here today. So it's just so beautiful to see you all on the screen for having played a part in exposing me to this wonderful world of new possibilities. And so I'm a lecturer at the University of Tasmania, and I teach in agriculture, and I teach farm business economics and farming systems and other things, but I always find I'm a misfit. I don't know how to put my thoughts into the dominant model. So diverse economies has given me oxygen, has given me the space, and including the Maori economic ways, just to know there are different ways. Thank you. Sorry for the long introduction. I couldn't resist seeing all your faces here today. Thank you.
Oh, it's perfect to introduce yourself this way. Could you tell us where you're from? I'd love to know, because I love to know where everyone's from. It's a Māori thing, and I'm nosy.
Of course, yes. Yeah, I know that's another thing we have to learn. I am from India originally. I was born in India. And so I'm very from a post-colonial context. But then I've come here and only recently had to look back my own history and realized I was part of a very oppressive system, even back in India. So in the oppressive caste system in India. So I'm still coming to terms with all that. and now working more closely with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. And so learning from them. So yeah, that's
Amazing.
my background. Thank you.
Amazing. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sadipa. Okay, awesome. Matthew, you're on the left of my screen of me, so I'll go to you next. Kia ora. And actually, once you've done your talk, maybe you could nominate someone else. That would be nice, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm Matt. I am Ngāi Tahu and Pauiwi, so Ngāi Tahu, a Māori tribe from the south of New Zealand, and Pauiwi means people from elsewhere. So we contain multitudes deeper. Got lots of colonized and lots of colonizers inside of me. And in my whakapapa. So whakapapa means like a structured genealogical relationship between all things. So I really like the intellectual whakapapa you just gave to how you came here. And that's really important. I'm glad Simon Barber is aware of my work. I'm certainly aware of him and his, and it's been very influential on me. I'm an accounting researcher technically. But I dabble in other traditions as well. And actually one of my closest colleagues is also at the University of Tasmania, Glenn Whenua. He's in the accounting department there. So that's me, and I'll pass on to Jenny.
Kia ora, thanks Matt. Kia ora koutou. Jenny Cameron. I am in the South Island of New Zealand, Te Waitangi, in a little fishing village called Moiraki, which is where I have retired to. And I am here to listen and learn. So just, interested to see what we're going to do in the workshop. So looking forward to being in your hands, Mark.
Kia ora. Where are you from? Where are you?
I'm originally from, as if my accent doesn't give me away, I'm originally from Meanjin, the land of the Yagara people, Brisbane. So
Awesome.
That's where I was brought up, on the banks of the Brisbane River. So I will pass to Grace.
Hello, good to see some familiar faces and to see some new faces too. My name is Grace Walsh. I'm an Irish woman hailing from Dublin, Ballyohaclia, on the east coast of Ireland, living in Lutruwita, on the unceded lands of the Palua Pakana people here in northeast Lutruwita. And I am 2.5 years into a PhD with Swinburne Centre for Social Impact, and I'm exploring the diverse economic practices of young people in northern Lutruwita, Tasmania. My background is community work, youth work, activism. I met my Tasmanian partner in Palestine, which is what kind of connected us and brought us here. And we are on his family farm now, kind of exploring how to steward land in a complex context, and exploring different ways to do that, that kind of breaks out of the mold and what's traditional here, and parenting and everything that goes with that. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Do you want to choose someone?
I'll go to Jessie.
Kia ora, thanks Grace. I am Jessie, she, her pronouns. I live in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand, and I grew up in Ōtautahi in Christchurch in the South Island, and I whakapapa to England and Scotland. I am a master's student here at the University of Auckland, and met Mark earlier in my studies, and then in that same project also met Molly Mullen, who brought me to diverse economies thinking, and yeah, I got to take part in the summer winter school earlier this year. And I am currently in the process of writing my master's thesis, which seeks to apply diverse economies thinking to cultural work and the way that Aotearoa has approached social security provision for cultural workers. And hopefully, do a reading for difference, see the ways that social security provision has allowed a proliferation of economic practice.
Awesome.
And I will pass to Kelly, if she's there.
Oh, I think Kelly's busy preparing dinner or preparing for a noho marae. She told me earlier.
Okay.
She's here in
In
spirit.
Yeah, kia ora everyone. Sorry about the
Oh,
delay.
yeah.
Also got multiple family people exiting the house at the moment, so I'm just saying goodbye to children. I'm Kelly Dombrowski. I'm from Wairarapa in the south part of the North Island of New Zealand. I was born in Wellington, and my ancestors came to Wellington from Scotland and Ireland and England and possibly Germany. I'm a lecturer. I'm almost a professor. I've been announced as a professor at Massey University in people, environment and planning. And I can't remember what else you asked us to say, Mark, but yeah, it's great to be here. And I wish I could fully be in the workshop, but I emailed Mark earlier. I'm going away to stay on a marae at 5:15, so I have to prepare a lot of vegetables from my garden to take to the kitchen to feed us all for 2 days. Yeah, that's what I'm doing, which is a important part of Māori economies, right? Tēnā tātou.
Awesome.
Who shall I pass to?
One more person.
Bavia.
Well, just before you do, just in case you're wondering what a marae is, it's a communal gathering place in Māori contexts, and we often think of it as being the house, but it's more than just the house. It's all the buildings and areas around it and stuff. But yeah, most tribes have got one, and most sub-tribes too. So yeah, kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora.
Okay, over to you. Is it Bhavya? Is that how we say your
Hi
name?
everyone. Yes, Bhavya. Yeah. I'm Bhavya. I grew up in Delhi, India, for most of my life. But in my early 20s, I was as part of an MPhil program that I was doing. I moved to the East Coast of India and started living with an Indigenous community. I'm myself not a non-Indigenous person, but have spent almost 11 years now with the community that I work with. So we started doing a lot of work around singleness and collective agriculture, which is how I started reading and got introduced to community economies work, which brought me to Australia to do my PhD with Catherine Gibson and Stephen Healy, which I've just submitted 2 months ago, I think. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, now I'm living in the lands of Maramadakal people and Darug people in Sydney, and yeah, just learning to live with country in Australia at the moment. Nice to be here today.
Awesome. Oh, kia ora. So welcome. Fantastic. So yeah, from where I come from, we come from, a lot of us that are in this Zoom, hearing where we're each from, what we do really helps us to build connections and relationships. We all have points of difference, but that also helps us to build empathy and understanding. And so having, in the Māori context, having a pepeha or a expression of identity, as I call it, I mean, there's other definitions around that, helps with that. Yeah. And so, yeah, awesome. So it's a few concepts I thought we'd just sort of clarify before we move on. So decolonize, you're all pretty clear with that. I'm sure you're all pretty clear with that. But I mean, would someone like to share what they think of when you hear the word decolonize, so that I don't have to say everything. Anything that pops to your mind.
I'm not clear about it, but just some vague ideas because I don't know how to do it. But in my mind, it is about removing the colonial ways of doing and thinking and seeing, which I have been conditioned, and I am so accustomed to that. It's actually firstly recognizing it, and then trying to work through removing it so new possibilities can fill that space. That's my understanding.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a few key words in there that you mentioned, removing or undoing sort of colonial colonization and its processes. Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything just before you do? I just shared a very seminal text from a lot about, from our childhood for most of us, Linda Tuwhera Smith, her book, Decolonising Methodologies. Very simple, but it's from a Māori perspective. And there's been huge amounts since that book. Does anyone else want to add anything around decolonize or decolonisation or decolonising before we carry on?
I suppose for me, it's important to recognise how privilege and power have worked. And so, when we do the introductions, I always think about my parents came from North Queensland, and while they were sort of dirt poor farmers, their grandparents had settled on land that had been the land of Aboriginal people, and the dispossession of those Aboriginal people enabled, those small farming families to establish a toehold from which, my mum was able to train as a nurse, my dad as an electrician, and from there they were able to send their kids to university, and I end up in an academic position. My brother's retired as a deputy of a high school, but he's also now got an academic position. But that's all on the basis of the dispossession of Aboriginal people. And I hear Mum talking about, she remembers as a child Aboriginal people coming to the house, and in her mind it's also tangled up with the Great Depression as well. So she's sort of got all these, and it's not that many generations ago that dispossession was still affecting people. And so I'm always conscious of how some of us has benefited, but that benefit has been absolutely on terrible things being done to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe Matthew can speak better about his stuff. But here's Matthew and Anna's book, The Economic Possibilities of Decolonisation. Sort of give another plug for your book there, Matthew. And I think it does have a definition of decolonisation in there. For me, I resonate with what you've written about how colonisation has occurred with capitalism. Colonial capitalism is effectively, all the parts of the world that we are living in and are from in this session today, in my view. And so decolonising can mean many things. Undoing colonisation, just as you said, Saidipa. And also maybe it could potentially mean arresting capitalism as a colonial force. That's an ideal I have anyway. I like to dream. And so anyone else before we move on?
I was just thinking how it's not it's one thing to read about it and sort of intellectually understand what decolonizing is, because it's that it gives you that break from and I remember I was struggling a lot to understand a lot of the things when I moved to Orissa, where I was working, because I was so trained in all of the economics and feminist and Western university training that I had, that a lot of the conversations that I would have with the women in the village would not make sense. So a lot of it was just living that life and engaging in everyday practices, which enabled me to learn and understand that, you live on the land and you learn with the country, and a lot of that has become common practice and everyday practice in life, and you learn it for life. So I think it's a lot to do with that as well.
Absolutely. Yes, it's going to be different things in different places according to different Indigenous cultures and what that means, right? Absolutely. Yeah, and what it means for the iwi hapu that I come from will be different from what it means for Matthew's iwi hapu, as an example. So, yeah, so the nuances and things are huge around this. Yeah, and also just as you say, Bhavya, actually going on the ground and experiencing it and engaging with it is really essential to understand it. Yeah, I do agree. Some of our graduates, one particular course, we make sure that we give them a tea towel when they graduate so they can wash the dishes. And for us, that means that so that they can go and engage literally in Māori communities in the marae and do dishes at the marae, so they actually are immersed in the kind of daily grind of the marae labour and goings on in Māori community contexts. So yeah, as an example. Okay, cool. So moving on, treaty. What is it? So some of us are here in Aotearoa, some of us are not. What is treaty? Colonial, say indigenous settler colonial cultures and having a treaty together. What does that mean for you? What's your experience of that? Some people around the world love this stuff. Some people don't trust it from different perspectives. And yeah, I wonder if we could just brainstorm a bit around that for a moment, because I think it's essential in terms of developing a decolonial model in current times in our colonized countries. I propose it is anyway. You don't have to agree with me, by the way. Yeah. So what do you think of when you hear the word treaty or Te Tiriti? A treaty between settler peoples and colonized Indigenous peoples?
I mean, I think about this a lot. I have to, because it's my work. And I said yesterday I had to grandstand a little bit because someone asked me what motivates me to do this research. And I said, well, I have to. Because if you imagine that some of the representatives of some of your ancestors invited the representatives of most of your ancestors into their space as part of an agreement. And then the representatives of most of your ancestors steamrolled that agreement. That's kind of what treaty means to me. It's about possibilities. It's about rights and obligations and broken promises that need to be healed. But it's also a pathway to the future. And so I don't know much about treaty in Canada, for example, but they do have a set of treaties around different territories there. But that's what our one means to us. And I do think of it as between political authorities, rather than say every individual has particular obligations, but then we can also think of it as a metaphor internally and for our own behaviours as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, lots in there. Healing broken promises between political authorities, possibilities. Yeah, awesome. Sorry, just jumped around a bit there, Matthew, in response, but just if that's all right, if I missed anything, let me know. Kia ora. Okay, yeah, someone else?
I'm obviously coming from a very different part of the world, but yeah, it's interesting for me as kind of a recent settler, I guess, in Lutruwita, because my family grew up with the stories of treaty in Ireland in the Civil War in the 1920s, and my family personally were involved in fighting against the treaty that was proposed because it involved partitioning part of the country, which we're still seeing the remnants of now, with Northern Ireland still struggling with that legacy. And so I guess I grew up with the stories and cynicism towards a treaty that was less than what was needed. and was kind of a political treaty that didn't really fulfill the promises that were being offered because it didn't involve, and this is something I've only been able to articulate since living here and learning from my Palawa Pakana friends and neighbors, but we went through a process of kind of political independence in one part of the country. It wasn't whole, but it also wasn't a decolonization. It wasn't a process of decolonization. We replicated the structures of power and the institutions of power, the language of power. I mean, you know, the fact that I'm speaking here fluently in English and barely can hold a conversation in my own language is testament to all that. And it's been really sharpened, I think, my understanding of that since living here, understanding that actually we didn't decolonize. We kind of made the treaty represented a compromise that was quite hollow in what that process needed to be. And so we're very much on that journey still in Ireland, and you can see it now in younger generations and how they kind of talk about their identity, and the discourse and the discussions that are happening now are, I think people are starting to understand through other conversations around decolonization in other parts of the world. It's kind of coming back and informing the Irish process. And it's not something that's happened here in Lutruwita, and it's being discussed very tentatively and by a minority. But yeah, it's been interesting to kind of, I guess, view it from that distance in another place that's going through that journey.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, that you mentioned the Irish example, and that treaties haven't always been used to benefit people who are in the colonized position. And sometimes they've been used to take advantage. I was in a room with American colleagues the other day, and they mentioned how they didn't trust treaties because they've all been broken over there with their Indigenous peoples. And this is in the US, that is. So yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah. Anyone else want to add something? Is there any sort of relevant treaties from India or anything, or that might be of interest and use here? No pressure though.
I have no knowledge, sorry. Okay. I don't know, Bhavya, if you...
I mean, I don't know treaty per se, but I like Grace was saying, the context is so different because like it's an independent quote unquote country. Like we don't have settler colonialism in a lot of ways in which like I think our political system has evolved. We are so colonial still in like our education system and in our government policies and all of it. And I find the difference between at least that I see in Australia and India is that it's like we're still a very post-colonial society where we have completely forgotten and marginalized original inhabitants of the land in the way that they're at the receiving end of everything. And it's almost like we want to forget that we have that past and move towards modernizing and becoming like the West. So it's a very different kind of history and present at the moment. So there's really not that kind of respect or even acknowledgement that we would require a treaty, yet that we need to sort of, give that due to the people who are living, who have lived, but more so that people are made to believe that, oh, you have to become like educated, you have to make more money, and so it's a very different context. And with right-wing politics, it's just becoming much worse these days. But yeah, so I don't know really how to respond to the question of decolonialism and treaty in that sense that we're discussing here today.
Yeah, but it's still really, really important that you're bringing this in the conversation, because your context from where you're from, that they will bring and offer things that definitely the context I'm from don't. You were able to break off from the British in the 1940s, right? And so we haven't really managed to do that here. We still have the Queen. Well, I would argue that. So yeah. Yeah, and please, people from Aotearoa, if you want to add anything else. I'm just going to just briefly summarize our treaty here in this country from if that's okay, for our people from Aotearoa. So, I mean, it's probably I think it's one of the sort of it's seen sometimes one of the shining examples in settler colonial relationships around the world. Our Te Tiriti of Waitangi, or the Treaty of Waitangi. I'd say Te Tiriti because that's a political stance too, because there's the treaty was signed mainly basically in Te Reo Māori, Māori language, and my hands come up on the corner there as I raise my hand. But there was an English draft, and there's been a lot of disagreement over the years over which version stands. And as far as I'm concerned, one of my ancestors actually signed it twice on the Te Reo Māori version, and so the Māori text is the legally binding one, basically, in our courts of law, in international law, and in short summary, it basically we invited the Crown, the British Crown, to come in and basically look out for their subjects, make sure British citizens from outside of Aotearoa behaved, didn't break any laws, while our Māori ancestors agreed that we would maintain our sovereignty, our Māori sovereignty. We wouldn't give it away to the Crown. But it was a partnership of existing together, and we could also enjoy the benefits of being British or citizens of the Crown. But basically, the way our treaty stands, that I understand it, is that Māori are able, under Te Tiriti, Māori maintain sovereignty, and we look after Māori things, taonga, whenua, and the Crown. There's a relationship with the Crown. There was also an agreement about the Crown being able to preempt and purchase some of our land first, if we were going to sell it. That's a basic nutshell. Matthew or Jesse, did you want to add anything to that? I've probably just murdered New Zealand history, Aotearoa history. Just trying to really simplify.
Covers things.
Awesome. And right now we've got a government that is trying to challenge that, and what I would argue is a conspiracy theory based interpretation of Te Tiriti that goes back to the 1840s to settler colonials, some of them, not all of them, who believed that we Māori had ceded our sovereignty to the Crown. And it's been used as a tool to try and take land away and extract our resources and our rights and things. So so if anyone disagrees, please tell me now. So that's good. No one said anything. So in one sense, it's been an evolving political situation especially since the 1970s, where the Māori text has taken favour in our country, and so decolonisation or decolonising has helped towards that in terms of recognising Māori rights. I'm not saying it has been achieved at all, because sometimes it gets undone all the time, depending on who's in government and the processes that are in play. But the contention is high. But for some people, some who come from settler backgrounds see it as taking away their rights or seeing it as being a threat. However, it doesn't. As far as I'm concerned, and far as the majority of academics out there and researchers, it's a win-win situation for everyone having a treaty like this. What our challenges in our country is to establish some wider public agreements around and education around our Te Tiriti, so that everyone is much more aware of it, because I think there's a lack of awareness out there. Having been a school teacher, that was an interesting and problematic challenge. So there's work to do in our country. But I think, just like what Matthew said, in that it offers possibilities of ways to work if the treaty is written in a way that allows for Indigenous rights to prevail, and this one does, in my view. Whatever that means. And just as you're saying, was it you were saying, Barbie, we are here speaking English? Or was it Jenny that was, oh, Grace, that you were saying that we are here speaking English? So the colonial thing is dominant, and it is dominant in our country. 15% of our country speak Te Reo Māori. Our population of Māori are 20% right now. It's growing. It was way lower when I was a kid, like maybe 10% or something. So yeah, anyway, okay, so we're cool with what a treaty is. If we look at it from an Aotearoa New Zealand framework, it offers possibilities. And if it is a treaty that allows for Indigenous rights, if it's that kind of treaty, not the Partition of Ireland treaty, or perhaps how some other treaties have been conveyed overseas in some other countries. I don't know enough about the American or Canadian treaties to talk about them. So, all right. Sorry, I'm just turning my pages, going to my notes. Are there any questions or comments at this point? Anything? Any complaints? Just let me know.
Just want to add, Mark, that over the last few years, so many people have said to me, if only we had a treaty like New Zealand, then you could do this. If we had a treaty like New Zealand. So that what you mentioned about possibilities, it's often presented as a barrier not having that treaty. So there's
Yes,
lack of recognition here.
I agree. Yeah, even though we do have the challenge of actually educating and trying to get complete widespread understanding in our country, there's still a little bit of resistance to it, but it is there, at least legally. So yeah, kia ora. All right, so what we were going to do is breakout rooms, but I think we'll do this together because of the time. So just thinking, what are some, and maybe we can do a brainstorm here and sort of try and build some stuff. And I could get the whiteboard out or something on here on Zoom, if you like. What are some economic models that to you value all people or value Indigenous peoples? I'll write the question down.
Mark, I've never seen the whiteboard being used on Zoom. I'd love to see it being used.
Oh yeah, okay. That value, let's try it in a
Maybe
moment.
I could, one of us could get it out, Mark, because then you'll be doing a lot. You'll be trying to facilitate and take notes.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All? Yep, absolutely. That's a good idea. So if someone wants to open the whiteboard, we could collaborate too.
People see that now?
Yep.
Cool. I've never used it. So
I'll try pasting this on. I've just posted it on the side. Let's see if it works. No, oops, it's not letting me. Add note. Okay. Text. Here we go. Here we go. Can you see that? Can everyone see that? Yes or no? Oops, my note's just gone. There it is.
yep, just come through.
It's supposed to be a question mark after that. There we go. There's a bit of a delay to actually put the stuff up, I've noticed. So what are some economic models that value all people, or that emphasize sort of, equity or equality? I would argue equity, but I'm happy for people to disagree on that. And what are some models that value Indigenous people? I wonder if we could brainstorm. We could probably just write them up here. So what you do is you click on the bottom of the whiteboard and you just start writing it up if you'd like to write, or you can say it and we can type it up for you. Is everyone happy with that? Really? Yes, there we go. That's interesting. Yep. We need some background music, really, don't we? I could play Poye. It might be fun to play.
What's the other one?
Doesn't. What other ones? Wellbeing economy. Yep. Was that you that did the line going down, Jenny? Were you testing it or?
Sorry, I can't figure out what I'm doing. Yeah, I wrote the line and then yes, so someone can delete it.
I know I'm really into graphic representations. I teach a lot at an art school.
Well, someone can undo the line for me. Please go ahead.
How you going? Anything you can think of? I was just thinking of wondering if there was a Celtic kind of equivalent to donut economics in the Māori space. And I thought of the Celtic tiger, but that's not really appropriate, is it, Grace? Sorry.
Don't get me started. That's I think the opposite of what we want to be aspiring to.
Exactly. Yeah, it only benefits the some rather than the all. Oh, we lost our whiteboard. Where did it go? Oh, I see. Existing whiteboard. Did you lose your whiteboard? I lost the whiteboard on mine.
I hope I didn't kill it. I was just typing something and it disappeared.
It was definitely me. Sorry. It's still there.
Still there, yeah.
But can we bring it up? It's not letting me bring it up.
Jenny, are you able to bring it up?
Considering I can't figure out how to write in it. But then, Matt, did you do it by sharing screen?
I can't.
Yeah,
Okay.
but no, I shared the whiteboard and I can still see that it's there. I just can't bring it back. But no, I think it might be worth, rather than us sitting around trying to get it to work. If you carry on, Mark, with what the next part of the
no worries.
will be, I'll do this in the background.
Yeah, it's a shame it's not there, but we can we go back to what we were writing. So we had on there, there was one from India, wasn't it? If someone could write that on the, maybe write your comments on the side, what you wrote on the whiteboard. Seems we've lost the whiteboard. First we lost breakout rooms, and now we've lost the whiteboard. Things never go to plan, and that's what makes things interesting, I think. At least that's what my gramps told me, who was a teacher. So if you write down what you wrote down on the side in the comments, that would be great. It's where we need some music, I think. I'll add a few things. Someone put I can't spell very well, so that's awesome. reason why I'm asking us to have them in front of us so that we can talk about them as we're going. I find it's quite nice to have things as reminders. Anything else? Support exchanges. Nice. Oh, degrowth. There we go. Oh, it's not letting me type. I should be on mute right now. Have I missed anything? I've probably missed. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything else you're thinking of? Diverse economies, has someone put that up there? That was something that was written. No, someone could write that.
Yeah, I put it up there.
Awesome. Awesome. Community partnering approach. Fantastic, everyone. Some of these I'm not aware of, which is great. Fantastic. You can tell I'm not an economics lecturer. So what have we got here? We've got economic experiments, attempting the Economies Strungathon in Odisha in India. I wonder if you could explain that. That's interesting. Who wrote that one? Was that you? Oh,
So
pardon?
it's the collective of Adivasi Indigenous single women farmers that I work with, and it's been like we created the collective in 2013, so it's been like long that we've been doing this work. And I'm saying economic experiments because we've been engaging in collective farming. So and the thesis was largely, like the PhD thesis was largely about reflecting on the work and trying to understand what are the different kinds of economic practices that we were engaging, which also sort of determines what kind of a collective we are of women. So it's a post-capitalist feminist framework that we are largely building on and working around, but also like decolonial knowledge systems of agriculture and practicing and collectivity. That's part of the, so that's why I'm saying experiments, because we do not have a model yet. We just rely on what we know and how do we keep doing agriculture and what we learn from it and revising from it. But certain things that we specifically follow are that because all of these women are landless farmers, they don't own farmland, so we lease common plots of land every 3 years, which is a cultural practice in terms of people who are landless in the community can lease land from people who own land from their own community relations, and there's no contract or paperwork, which is interesting economic practice. But you just sort of, if you can do farming in a particular year and somebody cannot, their land is lying ideal in that year, you can pay them some amount of money for 3 years and you get the lease for that land. Again, it's just a word of mouth exchange. And then after 3 years, that person who has given you the land to lease returns you that money, interestingly. So what they are making from that exchange is the interest for 3 years on that money. And you basically get to like produce and like make whatever money you want to make from that land. So it's a non-capitalist exchange that we started leasing land and doing our work on. The flip side of it is that we do not have a permanent land, so we have to revive soil and we have to engage in sort of organic practices every 3 years on different plots of land. But it is still interesting, and these 40 women who, and plus one who, like me and some friends who keep joining, we do agriculture together every year, and then we distribute the produce equally. Interestingly, the labor practices are not equally shared because I do a lot of the writing part of it. I'm mostly there during harvest season now, especially since living in Australia, because I can't make it for the other part of it. But in the first 3 years, I used to engage myself in the entire process of agriculture. Older women do less tedious works. Younger women are involved in more decision-making processes, and somebody takes care of the finances. So it's like labor is distributed, but then depending on capacity, but everybody shares the produce equally. So yeah, I mean, and that's been going on for, like I said, 8 years now. So yeah, it's not a model, but we're doing different experiments and also seeing how we are giving it back to the land and how we are replenishing our water resources and stuff like that. Indigenous seed varieties, recovering some of those. So and I'll speak more about it in the keynote, but yeah, just wanted to highlight what's been happening.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. It's really, yes, very inspiring, and on many levels for me. Yeah, so much to add there, but this is useful. This is very useful for how we're thinking in this workshop, where we go from here. Great. Donut economics, Māori donut economics. Does anyone want to talk to that? I could share a link if you like around that, but as a useful way, here's a link if you don't. Is everyone aware of donut economics here? No, some are, some aren't. All good. I'll share a few links for you as well. But if someone could start talking about it, that would be wonderful. While I look up just Kate Raworth's donut economics. No pressure. Don't all start at once.
I think most people were shaking their head when you said, "Are we aware of donut
really?
economics?" I read it when it first came out, but I can't remember anything about it. It has been taken up quite a lot in policy spaces. I know that. I think it's somewhere in Amsterdam, or cities are trying it out and things like that.
Copenhagen too.
Yeah. So it's just another approach, but I think it's a Tuwhera kind of thinker in Aotearoa rethought it from a Māori perspective. So it's had a bit of take up here as well.
Yeah. So it's basically, yeah, exactly. So anyone else want to add to that or not? It's basically Kate Raworth's idea. It's quite an old one now, and even she's critiqued where she's coming from with that. But that we live basically in balance in a kind of circular economy that we don't do too much of the bad stuff, and too much of anything interrupts the donut basically. So and it's a holistic model. Taina Bosia, Dean who I've worked with in a project, who's Ngai Tūhoi iwi, Central North Island iwi, has come up with it from her model. It's the idea, it's based on circular economics. Again, it's based on the donut, but it adds in aspects like spiritualism and well-being and from Māori perspectives and Māori cultural values in there. I've shared links to them on the side. Some people like my partner critiques donut economics, saying, well, we can't, it often ends up conforming with colonial capitalism, because we often just do a small area of something and we end up, it doesn't really change things. And she's arguing for degrowth. Are you familiar with degrowth? I'm not saying donut economics is wrong, by the way. For me, every model, if it undoes capitalism, could be useful. Anyone familiar with degrowth here? It's a few nods. There was a bit.
Just a vague understanding. Haven't delved deep into it. But just on Kate's model, I watched a TED talk of hers, and interestingly, she came up with it during her pregnancy, I think, during her break. And just to show again that the productive work that happens outside the paid forms of employment. And it was a proof in point that it took off as such a major model to challenge. I see it as a challenge or putting brakes on the limitless growth. There are upper limits and lower limits, which I found quite the inner circle of the donut, that people do need some level development to survive. But then we also need an outer limit. We don't exceed so that it makes more sense as a principle rather than as a model of how to organize ourselves. It seemed more in the abstract, it made more sense to me anyway. But I wanted to add that, sorry. Degrowth, a very vague idea, sorry. Just that we don't need to go backwards. We've gone too far.
Yes, with degrowth, yes. If anyone wants to add to that, it's basically the opposite of growth. Reducing. Anyone else want to add to that? I'm not a theorist in degrowth, I have to confess. My partner's constantly trying to remind me to read degrowth books at the moment. I haven't picked up any, I confess. I've got to, because I'm just focusing on so much else. That's why. That's what I tell her. It's true. Anyone want to add anything about degrowth in a general way?
I wonder what we focus on as growth. That's the problem.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, growth doesn't seem like a bad word to me, but we seem to focus on one growth. And from Bhavia's example, that they're actually taking care of the soil and actually adding value to the soil. It seems that value is being recognized by the people who lease it to you guys, so that they actually give you that money back because they've got something out of it. You're using their land and taking care of it.
You're growing the well-being of it.
Yeah, you're growing the well-being. So I don't, this is just a thought.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And my understanding, it's about reducing what we often value in colonial contexts around capital accumulation, materials, financial accumulation, profits. It's to do the opposite of that. Kia ora, Matthew. Thank you. Matthew told me he was going. Don't worry, everyone. So it's about those kind of material things that we think of in colonial context. It's not talking about the other things. So my understanding is that it does value growth in other ways, and whatever that might be. But I don't. Yeah, I need to look at that better. But so not all growth is necessarily bad. I agree. Yeah.
I often think of the word moderation with the idea of degrowth. Just let's moderate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I think they always argue that it's a strategic stabilization of the economy rather than like a recession, so it's about choosing where the direction it goes and stabilizing it for better social and ecological outcomes rather than a kind of free fall into economic recession. So being smart and strategic about it, because that's often one of the criticisms that gets thrown out about it, lazy criticisms that gets thrown against it.
It's an interesting one. And I guess any perspective, a lot of the models that we get out there don't necessarily consider the different values and needs of people on the ground, communities and culture, people of different cultures. So to take away some things, or to say we must stop doing something, might actually make it harder for those who are more vulnerable. And that's often a critique I have around that. A lot of our folks in Māori context, not me, I'm pretty middle class, you can tell by the way I speak, a lot of people in Māori context and not just Māori are struggling in this country. There's inequality and it's growing. And so changing models, they don't necessarily, personally for me, I propose that they need to consider though, how everyone's coping on the ground and try, and our model is only as good as it can be as its application in a way. So, but I think it's still worth considering models, things we're here. And yeah, just what you said, Bhavia, trying stuff on the ground is crucial. in order to develop stuff. And yeah, I often develop models through doing projects, and then we come up with models afterwards after doing the project. In this case, we're just experimenting and talking on this workshop. And you can, and as far as I see it, you could take away and use anything you like from this workshop, if you want. So
I remember just thought about something in one of the conversations I was having with the group, and we were talking about and growth, because as rightly put, it's not that we can live without it. Because that conversation was if we are engaging in farming, how much are we keeping for subsistence, and how much are we going to sell in the market for profit, and which market are we going to sell the produce, etc. And I remember the conversation went around how we don't make money at the expense of exploiting someone. We need to make money, but it comes from what we deserve, and so that has always stayed with me, that you go for growth, but without at the expense of exploiting someone. And that's why it's post-capitalist. That's why it has to be decolonial. So yeah, just reminded me of that.
Awesome. I want to come and work for you. Fantastic. And I know Jesse, you mentioned earlier that you've been focusing around diverse economies in your and that's been written up here. I wonder if you're happy to talk to that at all, diverse economies.
I'm talking about diverse economies at the Diverse Economies conference. Goodness. Yeah, diverse economies as in reading for economic diversity and difference, rather than centering capital and reading for capitalist economic practice. Instead, reading for economic diversity that diverges from this capitalocentric form of economic practice as part of, I guess, the performative project of enacting other economies. Does that work for our audience of diverse economies people?
Is that acceptable to everyone else? It is to me. Awesome.
Brilliant.
And so who was it this morning? I don't know if you came to a panel this morning, but Matthew talked about a diverse economies iceberg, where we often just see just the usual kind of money-making capitalist things on the top of the water, but underneath is all this unpaid labor and everything else that happens. But if it wasn't for that stuff, the stuff on the top wouldn't exist. And I quite like that model. But so it's revaluing that stuff, isn't it? Or am I right?
Well, there's the difference between diverse economies and community economies. So diverse economies being the inventorying of all this economic possibility, some good and preferable, and some that we don't want to move through to, but it's the inventorying of all that economic practice. So, well, in the classic inventory, slavery gets included in that. That's not economic practice we want to move toward, but it's recognizing that capitalist economic practice is just one form of economic practice amongst this diversity, which moves away from capitalocentrism, and then our community economies are what we want to
aim towards. I'm so glad you're doing your thesis in this.
I'm so glad to have found this wonderful area of scholarship.
Yeah, no, it's really important.
How lucky am I? so early in my academic. I'm so glad to have helped.
Awesome. Yeah.
Shows your expertise.
What's that?
Shows the expertise already.
Absolutely. That's what. Yeah. We couldn't teach you that before, so you're now teaching what you're learning. I taught Jess briefly years ago in a summer scholarship project. More like she taught us, but anyway. So yeah. What else have we got? We've got community partnering approach. Is that more what you're talking about here? What you've already talked about? Bhavia?
That's mostly
Yeah.
what Jesse was talking about, inventorying,
Right.
because I really found it useful in terms of how the inventorying is done. There's a link that I
Yeah.
can put in the chat where there's all
Yeah.
that. I think Jenny also helped create that, all those maps and worksheets where you literally can sit with people and do the mapping and inventorying of like different kinds of practices, and then what are the possibilities, and then what is the existing stuff that might be like not so much on the surface anymore. So it's very engaging. It gives you those kind of working tools that you can use.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. And I mentioned up here Māori economies. I mentioned commoning. So commoning, people come across that term before? Is it helpful to know that? The idea of sharing and politically leveling the playing field so everyone can contribute and has a vested interest. And Sophie Jerram, who will talk on Monday in this conference series, specializes in that. I'm not an expert there. But Māori economies, does anyone want to add anything about commoning before we carry on? I promise we'll get to actually developing something in a second, but I thought it's good to kind of look at existing models and remind and jog our memories and learn too, hopefully around this before we come up with something collectively as a possibility. Māori economy.
Share a little bit about the Maori economy for
Yes.
some of us who are not very aware, please.
Yeah. So basically it's looking at, I guess it could be looked at for me like a bit like diversive economies, except it's more, I often think of it more about, having by Māori for Māori, allowing, that economic capital and labor and production is all, Māori are controlling it and Māori are directing it. It can be quite conformative in relation to like capitalist, corporative kind of corporation style market-based models. For instance, when there are treaty settlements, iwi hapu tribes, sub-tribes get reparation money from the Crown. Often they're forming corporate entities that are, the interest is to benefit the tribe, but like one of ours has got that, but it doesn't necessarily address the hardcore needs of people and families on the ground. The money doesn't always come to them. It might be that they get cheaper health or something like that, but it's often quite token considering the whole colonial capitalist system that's causing inequality. So there's disadvantages, but there's also advantages in that Māori can shape and control things the way they are. Sometimes it can mean, like it can align with the community partnering approach that you mentioned, where non-paid labor is valued and can be rewarded or can be supported better as well. But so it's a fairly amorphous, open kind of concept, but it's the idea that Māori are controlling our economic sort of situation, our businesses and everything. So it really depends on who's controlling it and how and why. It can be quite capitalist or it can be quite anti-capitalist. It's a very general concept. So yeah, there was one other, I think. Was there anything else that we wanted to mention here? Oh, mana economy. And I talked about a mana economy. People not from Aotearoa, New Zealand, you may not be aware of the word mana. You might have seen it in Hollywood, in what's the word? Maui? No, what's the word? Is it called Maui? The movie, the Hollywood, I think it is. Yeah.
Moana.
Thank you.
Moana.
That's it. So mana in our culture refers to integrity, power, prestige, spiritual power. So it's quite open, but it's about how the idea is that in Māori contexts you try to lift the mana of others, and collectivity is very fundamental. And so everything you do it can be about raising the mana of everyone. And not just everyone, but everything that's alive. And sometimes it might not be living things like maunga, mountains, rivers, streams. They have mana too. So raising the mana of everything and everyone around you. And if that's the goal, collectivity, then maybe collective economics might have some value. And it's just a kind of loose concept, but I was thinking about it a wee bit in response to Matthew Scobie's book. And I mentioned it this morning as a dream to kind of think about. But yeah, so that's a possibility in terms of a way of approaching things, because collectivity has been tried in different ways in different contexts, definitely in colonial and European contexts, but it hasn't always worked in terms of an approach. You know, like often capitalism and competition and individuality can take it up, can undo the collective intentions. I think of communes in our country in the 70s and 80s, mainly European, Western, Pākehā. That means New Zealand European folks were like trying to set up. I had lots of friends that grew up in communes, but pretty much all of them fell apart eventually, because things like private property ownership took over, or individual rights became important. However, in Māori contexts, if we're decolonising, we may, the idea of collectivity is fundamental. It's before our individuality. Not to say that individuality is not there, but we do, in Māori ways of being, it's about looking out for everyone, looking out for, kids are automatically trained to look out for the old people around you and vice versa. Whereas you don't get that necessarily in Western European contexts that I also come from. Does that make sense?
That just sparked a thought which came up when you mentioned it in the morning's panel too, Mark, that when we try to force an idea down into a culture or group, and sounds good from this other context and let's apply it top down, you get these failed experiments sometimes. And it seems the ones that survive or make more sense or have more chance of working are the ones that are more embedded with spiritual, cultural, other social interactions that give meaning, and more than just the economic interaction, it seems, because even commoning and collective experiments that Ostrom and others have written about, whenever they've been forced down in a community, it sometimes creates new problems. It actually doesn't, it's quite hard to force these things onto a group. So I don't know how we can then actually embrace the goodness of this when we haven't got the broader cultural
so maybe it's
cultural tools to reinforce those ways of thinking beyond just the economic exchange.
Absolutely. Some say sometimes a revolution works better if it comes from within rather than from the outside. That is driven by the culture and the people within that who are experiencing that thing in order to to really make change. Often European our European ancestors have tried to change countries, change cultures from the outside, and usually it's failed. Almost always. In fact, always, I would argue.
Also, to understand that these cultures have survived for so long, they have ways within themselves that have always existed, and people have practiced those and sustained those. So to believe like why development efforts fail so much because they think that people don't know and we will make something better for them, which does not work because they already know, they're already doing it. It's for you to go and learn and do better. So it's that kind of difference.
Absolutely. And so maybe is that cool to start moving into a kind of framework that could be a possible potential framework? And it doesn't have to be perfect, but we can try. Should we try the whiteboard again, or do you want me to try and see if I can set up a whiteboard? I'll see if I can set one up. Here we go. I've got a new one. Okay, add a sticky note. Oh, look at this. How's that? Can you see that, everyone? Is that okay? Oh, I can see some of you. Great. Awesome. So we've got some lines ready. So, and you can undo it too, I think. what you do. There's an undo button down the or redo down the bottom left. So in terms of a framework, what could be some starting points that we could look at if we're looking at an economic model that could be decolonial or aim towards decolonisation, that engages between settler colonial politics, settler indigenous politics. I would argue that embraces indigeneity. In our country, a lot of us in the Māori space and a lot of Pākehā would argue that what's good for Māori is good for everyone. And I definitely agree with that. Non-exploitative, great. Non-oppressive, yep. Brainstorming, I think, is brilliant to do like this. Let's add in what you think. We can speak, well, if you want to speak it out, that'd be great. You don't have to.
Struggling for the words for a thought. Of it needs to also emerge from the country, from the place, and be relevant to that place.
Exactly.
That so
Yeah.
Place-based.
yeah, place-based. Yeah.
So account of well-being of place. Yep. Asking who benefits. What impacts does one's, I'm just reading this out, by the way. What impacts does one's person's capacity to live well impacts others? Nice. Including non-human others. Yep. And the dairy farms as an example takes into account well-being of people, place-based, non-universalizing. Great. Orientating towards the DE goal of surviving together well with others, both human and more than human. DE, what does DE goal mean?
Sorry, diverse economies.
Thanks. Awesome. Oh, you're correcting it. Awesome. Thank you. Non-exploitative, non-oppressive ethical relations, building safe spaces based on trust and reciprocity. Yes, I think so. Exchange actually is quite fundamental in Māori context, the idea of exchange. Co-design with Indigenous people leading Indigenous issues. I can't see the edge there. To what extent, Jenny, what you're writing there, it's over on the edge for me, or is that my whiteboard is not?
I think you can zoom in and out. So you can,
you can. Yes, thank you.
I've just discovered that too. So many fun features.
Excellent. Trust people in my generation not to understand the technology. To what extent do, well, I mean me, to what extent do economic practices acknowledge independence with others, including the world around? Great. Great. Oh, you can move your things. How are we going? Does someone want to respond to anything yet?
I mean, it's just a small association that when I was hearing you speak about mana, economy, and mana in Sanskrit or Hindi, it means, I mean, the bad translation is mind, but
Wow.
especially from like Bengali, which is a Bengali Hindi Sanskrit association, is more about something which is training of the mind, which is like soul oriented. And so I was just thinking about how words have different meanings, but also similar meanings in different cultures, and they inform how we start exploring the meanings behind those words, and then that determines our practices. So learning languages, and in the morning session also, we're talking about that.
Use of language, I think, can be important. It's not just in the settler language. Yeah. On that note, I think.
Like I remember the first time I was in the village and somebody had unfortunately drowned, and in the way that we talk about it is that somebody drowned in the river, and everybody just kept talking about in that community how the river had taken that person. And that shift made me explore the Kui language, that's the language of the community, so much more, because it made me realize, and I was like, what do you mean the river took the person? And they're like, no, the river took this person. And I kept like not arguing, but I kept trying to understand as, no, the person, like they drowned in the river, and they were like, no, the river took the person away. So it's just like those kinds of, or the forest is calling us, so we are going to go bring the woods today. And so these things were confusing in the beginning, because I grew up practically getting all my education in English. But that has also brought my attention back to my own mother tongue, which is Hindi, as to how there is that kind of diversity, and which is interesting to explore in different languages and words.
Absolutely. Be interesting to think from Grace, from an Irish perspective. Do you speak Irish?
Yes, poorly. We all learn. It is still compulsory in school, so we all learn it in school. And depending on where you live or what your family background is, you might use it outside of the school context, but the majority don't. So I think it's about 40% say they can speak it to some degree, but only I think only like less than 5% use it daily. Yeah. So it's.
Is collectivity a valued thing in Ireland at all, out of curiosity?
I think it is, and I think it's taken living in a non-Irish culture, in a kind of more Anglo, I guess, culture to some degree, to really see. I've just come back, actually. I'm only back 3 weeks. And it was actually just, I hadn't been back in a long time, and I brought my 3-year-old son home for the first time. And for me, it just really brought that home, the difference, like the family connections, the clan, like it's and I also come from quite a working class background, so I think that maybe is amplified. But I definitely think there's a collectivity. I think the Irish probably have more in common with maybe some of their Mediterranean neighbors and people in other parts of the world than I do with maybe Britain or some kind of European cultures in that sense. Yeah, I would think so.
Interesting. Whereabouts in Ireland again is it that you're from? Sorry.
I'm from Dublin. Yeah.
That's right, Dublin.
Not
Thanks.
the city,
Yeah,
not the city, but the kind of
the region.
outskirts.
Yeah, wow. Awesome. Awesome. I see we've got multi-generational thinking here. Yeah, 7 generations forward. Yep. So economic subjects. Death relates to recycling, thinking of the role death plays in all of this. Yes. Returning bodies to the land. To what extent is death acknowledged? Death of animals, death of plants. Yeah, right. That's an interesting one. Where I am, I engage with forest ecology, and a lot of the projects I'm working on with communities, and so life and death are very big parts of it all. My partner is into permaculture, gardening, and that again is the same. So thinking of everything as part of a wider ecology, and it's a very very Māori way of thinking things too. So we're not separate from other non-human things, or other things. We're interconnected with everything in a Māori perspective. So
I know it's sorry, going back to the overdoing the Irish input, but
no, it's great.
It's just a bit relevant. It's a bit relevant at the moment because we've just come through the kind of horrors of the mass-produced commercial plastic pumpkins in every supermarket in this part of the world, I'm sure. And it actually, the origins of Halloween lie in an Irish holiday or festival called Samhain, which was brought over by Irish settlers to the States and then kind of, exported here. But it actually is about the idea that the start of the darkness and the end of the light part of the year, and going into the kind of the time when decay and all those kind of cycles happen, was actually the Celtic New Year. Like, it was considered the start of things, and I think that way of seeing things and that shift in consciousness is actually so interesting. And there's so many cultures that have had those ways of looking at things that you don't maybe get in Western capitalist society.
And I would argue Anglo/Roman Christian influence sort of colonial society. Yeah, we just had Halloween huge here. We had about 300 kids knock on the door, so we're no exception. It's the only flat street in our suburb.
It's a seasonal festival. It should be happening in autumn. The queue is in the pumpkins,
That's right. There were no pumpkins here except plastic ones. Yeah. Hey, this is really awesome, everyone. What we've got here. So should we look to summarize what we've got here on the side, and sort of in terms of themes? What do you think? Does that sound good? I could easily say let's just do this, but because I come from a lot of consensus-based decision-making processes, I'm interested in your thoughts as a group. Do you think we're ready to start to summarize some themes on the side of what we've got here?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I think we could cluster and summarize. Yeah.
Happy for people to type on the side in the notes as well. I mean, at the moment, it's quite a web of things here, isn't there? So maybe I might I'm thinking of the structure, and there's quite a web, there's quite a mesh of stuff. Perhaps rhizomatic might be, I don't know if that's appropriate. Is that all right for me to write web?
Should we try sticky notes for the themes, and then we can take the text from those sticky notes?
Could you say that again? Sorry.
I was just saying that should we do sticky notes for the themes, and then we can take the text to those sticky notes?
Oh yeah. Do you want to show? Do you mean? Can you explain how? Sorry.
It was showing the option for sticky notes, so like add sticky note like this. So I think it can generate different sticky notes, and then we can write the theme on the sticky note and then take the text to that particular sticky note. So it's color organized is what I was saying.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, awesome. Great. Thanks for suggesting that. I learn something new all the time, especially on Zoom. Nice. Great. Let's do that instead. So let's sort of, so we're emphasizing key themes that we're seeing here with sticky notes. Is that right? How are you going, everyone? Okay? Self, more, other. Nice. Taking the long view, the time frame. Nice. And then I think that's a good point, because so often the way we're conditioned in capitalist, materialist economies, that we want things now, here and now, as consumers. We have to deliver. And so what if it's something that is allowed to develop in the time that it takes? And that definitely aligns with Te Ao Māori world thinking. Co-designing and co-learning. Yep. Human and more than human relations. Yep. Independence between people and between people and environment. Yep, interdependence, I mean. Providing space for Indigenous people to lead and run. Working. This one, resource. I so should have put on music. I keep saying it. I just don't want to distract everyone. When I work with students, we'll put on music, and especially when it's live and in person. Language to create ways of looking at the world and ways of being in the world. What language helps make it possible? Yes. Embedded response to response, embedded in and in response to place. Yep. Balance. Yep. Great, everyone. It's going really well. What do you reckon? We're missing anything?
Are the ethical questions covered generally?
Mm,
We have
mm,
specific values we want, but
mm,
sometimes we have these unexpected ethical dilemmas that come up and then don't
mm,
know how to navigate. So to be able to openly, I don't know, again, I haven't read it, but the ethical
mm,
questions that
mm,
the community economies book
mm.
forces us to ask, but leaving them as questions so that each community works it out themselves rather than.
Yes, so maybe that's something you can write up there. That's a nice way to put it. So it goes back to the what do you call it? Embedded in response to place. The idea of, maybe they call it placemaking. There's many ways to call it, but that there's a set of questions that each community has to ask, and maybe it's community centered each time in such a model. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I'm trying to put that in.
Mm. So yeah, if you could put that up there, those questions, each community addresses its a set of questions around, does that address them? Do they have money or not? Is always a question. You know, is it a system that relies on using some kind of currency or not? In Star Trek, they don't use money. So just a thought. um, um, they rely on personal status.
I remember when I first came to Melbourne 20 plus years ago, they ran a survey and put the results in the newspaper. They asked children what they would like to see in the world, and they put all these quotes. And the thing that stood out to me was so many children said, I wish there was no money, so I could get as many lollies as I wanted, or as many, but it was quite quite common. It was quite funny how many of them said, I wish there was no money.
Mm. Mm.
That is so interesting because now a lot of it is, how do I make so much money?
Mm. Yeah, that's
Like
right.
actually not want to make so much money, but yeah, can we do away with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Our kids deal in they deal in currencies of candy, as you would call it. We call them lollies in our country. So Halloween is a particularly useful time over here because they managed to develop big bags of lollies, big bags of candy, and they trade them.
Mm.
How are we going? A bit of a draft there, a bit of stuff. I think it's great what you guys are all writing. And I think you've always got the potential of the capitalist economy and, what other countries are doing, or is this for a local community, or is this for a model for a national state? I guess it depends on what we want. What do you think? Who would like this kind of idea to be for communities more than a
I just prefer the agency of community.
Mm,
And I just worry that taking it to a higher scale means it gets forced on other people that
yes.
are too far away from experiencing, or that the idea didn't, what you said earlier, that it's emerging from within kind of things. I am leaning towards keeping it quite local and place-based.
Anyone
But
else? Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Sadipa, I agree. What do anyone else see it differently or agree or? And how you're seeing this? No comments? I was always told to wait 40 seconds in my training.
I think I agree strongly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the motivations for doing the research I'm doing was my kind of fatigue with seeing like top-down solutions to young people's economic participation, and it's
Yes.
been so rich just sitting with young people and hearing about all the things they're doing in their lives and what's valuable to them, and probably quite would be like surprising to some people, I think. And the idea that could be the starting point, to build from, rather than it coming the other way, just seems so so much more. There's so much more possibility in it, particularly in a community that would be deemed kind of low socioeconomic and has been kind of diminished as being less than, and somewhere where there isn't possibilities, and actually they're rife once you start with the community, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. If anyone disagrees, please speak up, because it'd be great to hear your perspective and add it into the pool.
Well, I was just thinking about that often what can happen at a sort of policy level are things like the enablers that might enable these sorts of things to happen. So, like a basic income grant, for instance, can often be an enabler of people doing a whole range of different types of work. And even in Aotearoa, something like that everybody over 65 can get, well, the pension or superannuation as it's called here, means that, for instance, people can do things like go to the TT Island and do mutton birding, or go to the West Coast and do white baiting, and participate in some of those stewardship practices that are enabled because of the way the social security system here works for people over 65. So I think it's actually that you want a whole range of things going on.
Yep.
True.
Yeah, and that really interacts with ideas about the state as a partner state, and thinking about like how the state can operate to allow proliferation of diverse community economies, and that social security provision. I mean, that's where my work is looking, and looking at what kind of proliferation of, I keep using that word, God, of economic practice can emerge, well, in my case specifically for cultural workers, when social security, like when basic subsistence needs are met by a state who is enabling economic possibility to flourish. Because what are the other, it's a Finnish book, partner states, or what is it? I can't remember. Where the state just leaves one alone to let community economies do its thing, or the state does something else, or the state partners and actively supports, or like through subsidized space, or through other things, and then just stepping right back and letting communities get on with doing their thing.
With their thing, yep.
Yeah, I don't know that contribution was all that. I'm very sleepy over here, so but
No, all good. Yeah, no, it's
vague musings.
Friday, 6 p.m. on a Friday here. Now. Got 3 minutes to go officially. So yeah, absolutely. And this is just, this is just part of a long process, I'm sure. But there's a whole lot of stuff in here. That someone's mentioned time, balance, collectivity, who speaks. So the power in the process and the dynamics and the structuring is very important. Who has power, where? There's a few words around collectivity here, and giving power to Indigenous people over Indigenous things. It's often not done very well, even in Aotearoa, in my view, I would propose. While we have a Te Tiriti, it's still a top-down hierarchical market-based system that often, puts more power on more wealthy people, right? So 6 p.m. we have to go, absolutely. I understand this was recorded. I'm not sure if it was, but I had recording in process when I first opened to this. So is that okay with everyone that this is recorded? We've been more chattering, should I say, which is, excuse my expression, rather than it being a lecture thing. But I really love your ideas, everyone, your whakaaro, your thoughts. I think they're really awesome. So shall we, I might take a screen grab of this, and you may want to too, if that's of use for all of you. And yeah, we're going to have to wrap up now, if that's okay. But do you have any final reflections on what we've come up with so far? If you each want to say a little bit or anything before we finish?
Just thank you. It's been really good to interact and hear from all of you, to get this space that only so many of us were here, so we could actually hear from everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's great that we didn't have lots of people.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, like these kinds of co-learning spaces and just brainstorming together, even if it's a Friday afternoon. It's really like engaging, and definitely live for things like these. So if we could keep doing them whenever, that's
I agree.
a great idea.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And who said Zoom? We can't do stuff on Zoom. Yeah, thanks for the Grace, for sharing the thing on the side. Neighbour discussing the paradigm shift that is needed from an Irish perspective, partly in an Irish touching role of language and economic shifts. Fantastic. Thank you, Grace. Did you want to add anything, Grace or Jenny or Jessie?
Just a big thank you. Yeah, it was a lovely way to spend an afternoon.
Thank you too. Awesome.
Yeah, it's lovely just to have nice time to sort of sit quietly and type and so on and think.
Awesome. It stops me talking all the time. That's, I think, positive. My kids would tell you that. Awesome. Jess, did you want anything?
No, I'm all good.
Awesome.
But thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed it and really enjoyed your input, as I said. So yeah, take away this and do with what you will, if you like. I hope that's okay with everyone. So yeah, thanks again. And as I say in Te Reo Māori, ka pai te pō, have a good evening if this is evening for you. It's 6 p.m. here. I imagine it's 2 or 3 hours earlier in Australia. I'll close up with a karakia as a blessing, a Māori blessing, just to send us on our way. And yeah, I hope to see you again in the further Zooms, CERN sessions. And I understand Bhavya has a keynote coming up. Is that right? One of our Liviana sessions. So thanks again. Okay, so we'll close up now. Ka karakia inai nei whakamutanga. That means now we're going to do a karakia for the ending. Okay. Kia ora te mareno hia whakapapa paunamu hei hurahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Araha atu, araha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Tina, haumi hui e tāki. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'll send you on your way now. And
great to see everyone.
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's make the
Thank
world a better
you.
place with, and let's make the world a better place with economics.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
See you, Mark.
Bye.
See
Yeah.
everyone.
Kia ora. Bye, everyone.